Okay. Great. Well, we're a little early, but I think everyone's ready to go, so we'll just get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We have with us the co-chairs of the Secretary General's panel on critical energy transition minerals, and that is Ambassador Diseko of South Africa and Director General Juul Jørgensen of the European Commission. And you'll also notice that we have with us the Secretary General's Special Advisor on Climate Action and Just Transition, Mr. Selwyn Hart. We'll turn it over to them for brief remarks, and then you'll get to ask them some questions. And just to say, the report the embargo is being broken right now. There's a Secretary General's message on it, which you should be receiving. And that's about it. Selwyn, would you like to start?
Thank you so much, Florencia, and good afternoon to everyone. And let me welcome the two co-chairs of the Secretary General's panel on critical energy transition minerals, Ambassador Diseko and Director General Jørgensen of South Africa and the European Commission, respectively. The co-chairs just presented the final report of the panel to the Secretary General, and as Florencia just indicated, the Secretary General issued an official message which welcomes the report, which was delivered in very short order on a very strict timeline from the co-chairs, and he calls it a how-to guide to help generate prosperity and equality along with clean power. We know that the renewable energy revolution is accelerating, and we know that this acceleration needs to happen if we are going to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The Secretary General decided to establish this panel in response to calls from developing countries to ensure
Recording in progress.
To ensure that the renewable energy revolution does not reproduce and amplify inequalities of the past, that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past where developing countries and resource-rich developing countries were relegated to the bottom of the supply chains, and that the exploitation of critical energy transition minerals did not result or does not result in the mass violation of human rights and degradation of the environment. This panel worked hard over the course of the last 4 to 5 months, really to discuss the complex set of issues around the acceleration of the need for these critical energy transition minerals. It was an extremely diverse group of panel members, and I dare say probably the most diverse group of countries and interests ever assembled to address a set of issues so critical and at the heart of the renewables revolution. So we welcome the report, and the Secretary General also discussed with the co-chairs of this panel next steps. We will need to consult, of course, with member states and other stakeholders on a way forward, and a way forward primarily on the 5 actionable recommendations proposed by the panel. Permit me to also apologize. I have to leave before the end of the press conference, but I just wanted to provide some contextual framing and also to publicly thank these 2 amazing co-chairs, these really 2 amazing consensus builders who were able to deliver an ambitious outcome in a relatively short space of time. So over to you, co-chairs.
Thank you very much, Selwyn.
And let me begin by greeting members of the press present here, my colleagues, and also acknowledge my co-chair. It really is an honor for my co-chair and I to present the report of the panel on the critical energy transition minerals. When we accepted this task, I'm not quite sure we understood fully the significance and the enormity of the challenge that we were being given. I think as it pertains to where humanity is, where I would say it's basically at the crossroads, where we face a multiplicity of crises that no one country can solve alone without collaborating with the others. Either we work together or in disarray, we risk losing what we have. And of course, at the center of this is the climate change challenge that requires all countries to move together in tandem to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and live up or try to aim towards living up to the global goal of reducing temperature rises to below 1.5 degrees Celsius. And to do that, you need critical minerals. Now, our mandate was to make sure that we come up with something that takes into account that we have a history. We didn't arrive here out of nowhere. And that in looking at the history that we have, lessons must be learned from it to ensure that as we strive to reach the goals and targets we've set for climate change, we also ensure prosperity and justice and equity for all. The history of mining is not a completely blemishless one with respect to developing countries, the majority of whom are producer countries and hold these minerals. It is the hope that in reading this report, it will inspire people to focus more on ensuring that as we draw on these minerals, we do not disfigure the economies of the producer countries. We do not disable them and incapacitate them while extracting and benefiting and ensuring that we somehow rise to the challenge of meeting our climate change goals. So at the heart of it is the need to look at the development issues such as value addition, beneficiation at a source, equity and justice within and between nations, intergenerational equality, and gender issues across the value chain, as it were. It is important that the message of the essence of this report is to inspire care and caution to avoid the mistakes of the past, where we are already seeing conflict generated by the scramble for these resources, particularly in my continent, that is bleeding. You know, Cobalt Red, the book, illustrates that, the title of it. I read red to mean that our continent is bleeding already in the rush to extract these minerals, in complete disregard of norms that have held society together since the Second World War, at the heart of which is human rights and other important areas such as the environment that must be safeguarded as we extract. So within the short, limited duration of time that we had, we came up with 7 guiding principles that are interdependent and interrelated. You can't just work on one and hope that the others will just fall into place. We suggest that they are taken as a set of interrelated and indivisible rights that must guide the way in which we aim at extracting minerals to address climate change, and while doing so, we are able to achieve equity and justice and stimulate development so that we can eradicate poverty, but we can ensure a prosperous future for all of us. The first principle is on human rights being at the core of mineral value chains. The second one is environmental integrity. The third one is justice and equity. The fourth one is development must be fostered, And the fifth one is on investment finance and trade, and the sixth one is on accountability and anti-corruption, and as essential areas. And the seventh principle is about the context in which this takes place, the importance of multilateralism as the place where we solve disputes and problems that we have that may be related to the extraction of critical minerals. Cooperation is better than aiming, at conflict that might take us back to the brink of war. And this report, it's interesting that it comes out in an unsettled situation. We're not settled. There are wars that challenge, I think, our understanding of the infrastructure that should hold peace going forward. The principles are accompanied by actions, a set of actions that we propose to ensure that they set and they hold. And the first one is on accelerating value addition and development and all of those things. But let me hand over to my co-chair to speak to the other sets of actions that we've identified, including the ASM.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair, also for our close cooperation over these last 4 months in putting together this report. It has been a real honour, a privilege, but also a big responsibility to put together meaningful principles and recommendations to the UN Secretary General and the UN system to address what are really existential challenges of our time. Existential because these minerals are needed for us to address climate change, through the tripling of renewable energy, doubling of energy efficiency towards the transitioning away from fossil fuel, as was agreed at COP28. Existential because they touch upon development, livelihood of a number of people across the world, most notably in resource-rich developing countries. Existential because they are relevant for our resilience and our security. All of us globally, whether it is locally or in our global and multilateral cooperation, and existential because they pertain to human rights and the rights of indigenous peoples, and our ability to promote and implement those rights through the global system and in our cooperation. So it has been a significant challenge, and I think we are just two of the people who are working on it. We are joined by a panel of extraordinary colleagues from across the world, from different organizations and governments, young people, civil society, indigenous peoples, representatives, and it has been a real pleasure to work with them. So I think I would also use this opportunity to thank every one of them for their engagement and their commitment and their constructive work with us to help bring an outcome that can hopefully bring change, because change is what is needed here. As my co-chair said, we have made a set of recommendations to the UN Secretary General, and those are recommendations for action. And it is action for change that we're looking at, because we know that given the current circumstances, given the way the value chain of critical minerals is operating, there is a need for change to bring justice and equity and to help ensure that the opportunities for development that are inherent in this change, in this transformation, that those opportunities are realized. So really to reduce the distance from what is on paper, what are the existing rights and principles on which we all agree, and what is the reality? How are those rights and principles realized? How do they benefit peoples, whether it is artisanal small-scale miners locally, or whether it is women, indigenous people, whether it is at the extraction and exploration, or whether it is further down the value chain, also to make sure that that value chain does not have a larger than necessary impact on the climate through greenhouse gas emissions, and that they do not damage the environment. And so that is what the actionable recommendations are about. I think the actionable recommendations clearly show that more is needed. We've done our best over these past 4 months, but what now needs to happen is really a follow-up and action to help make that a reality. In the actionable recommendations, as you have said, we are addressing specifically the questions related to development and value addition, the possibilities, the opportunities for developing countries, both resource-rich developing countries, but also other countries that do not currently reap the benefit, through suggesting an establishment of a high-level advisory group to take forward these challenges, including challenges related to trade, working with UNCTAD and the WTO, but also challenges related to human rights through the human rights bodies of the UN system, hopefully moving forward and taking up these issues. Traceability, transparency, accountability are critical to bring change and to improve the situation. Only if we can trace where are minerals from, what are the value chains, are the value chains sustainable, have rights been respected, has the environment been protected, are we doing what we can? That requires traceability to lift the floor globally to make sure that the practices overall are better. So that is another actionable recommendation for the establishment of a traceability system, a system that will also help artisanal and small-scale miners that are some of the people that have the hardest circumstances and that benefit the least from the minerals value chain that they are part of, but also again indigenous peoples whose rights and opportunities must be promoted and implemented in all the work here. And so a traceability scheme work towards that is really a critical recommendation, together with a specific recommendation for an initiative to address the concerns and help improve, give a voice to artisanal and small-scale miners there. In our work, we have been looking both at the past and at the future, focusing on change and what needs to be done within the field of environment, environmental protection. As regards the past, there are legacy issues, there are legacy mines, and so we also recommend the establishment of a legacy mining fund that can help ensure that there is financing available for the cleanup of the legacy mines that are out there. And then looking ahead into the future, suggesting the establishment of targets and a scheme for circularity, simply making better use of the materials we have and making sure that our minerals use will not have a negative impact on the environment going forward. So those are the main actionable recommendations. The real question now is for how can we best help take it forward and bring the change that is needed in this sector, including in the UN system and with the UN membership, with whom we have been engaging and consulting throughout the process as well. Thank you.
Great. So we'll turn it over to questions now. We'll start with Amelie and then Sherwin.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can I ask a question before you leave? Just quick one, please. Amélie Bottelier from AFP News Agency. Just one quick question. In his statement just released now, the Secretary General talked about discussion, consultation about the report ahead of COP29. So what do you expect at COP29 to happen about this issue that would go forward with the report?
Thank you so much. He has identified COP29 as an important milestone where hopefully we can define more precisely what are some of the next steps. Of course, we're now discussing with the co-chairs the follow-up process to ensure that there is buy-in from member states and other stakeholders. And the next big political milestone is COP29, where we believe, following a process of consultations, we can then potentially convene and have more precision around what those essential next steps are to fully operationalize the actionable recommendations.
I have another larger question now that Mr. Hart has gone. Yeah. So I know that the mandate of your work was focused on terrestrial mining, but we all know that a lot of big mining companies are getting ready to mine in deep sea bed. And Obviously, they're not the same question of impact of local communities, at least human communities. But we know, science know that there are some impacts on the environment, on the ocean in general, in kind of doing the buffer for climate change impact. So don't you think that establishing a traceability mechanism without taking into account these future minerals, critical minerals that will also eventually come into the market, is a caveat for this mechanism that you came up with?
Thank you very much, Emily, for raising a question about the deep seabed and what is happening there. The panel was established by the SG using his convening power in a context where there is an intergovernmental process on seabed matters. And the way in which our mandate was crafted was such that we sought to avoid preempting member states in their intergovernmental process to resolve issues on the seabed side. And that was the main consideration that ensured that limited us in our approach. But there is a sense in which the principles are universal in a way because they're founded on existing and legally agreed mechanisms that are in place that seek to prevent harm being done. And we list those at the end of the report. But a very quick and short answer is that there is an intergovernmental process where all members of the UN are busily engaged in trying to work out what needs to be done there in order to put guardrails and make sure that you've got the necessary safeguards and protections that are needed, while not hindering development and, as it were. That's my short answer to it. I don't know if you'd like to add.
Nothing to add. Thank you, Co-Chair.
Ambassador, Director General, on behalf of the UN Correspondents Association, thank you so much for coming to talk with us. I'm Sherwin Bryce-Pease, South African Broadcasting. Ambassador, you talked about a continent that was already bleeding, so I imagine that a report of this nature is very much in part to cauterize the bleed, right? So it comes down to, as the DG talked about, taking what's on paper and making it a reality. Implementation is obviously going to be key, but there's this asterisk at the bottom that says voluntary. So your recommendations are voluntary. How do you get people to sign up and, make voluntary a reality?
There is a part in the report that says the recommendations are founded on existing instruments, legally binding instruments, that include the Charter of the UN and that include the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the International Covenant on Socioeconomic and Cultural Rights, and a whole range of instruments, the UDHR, the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. It also includes agreements that have been reached at the ILO that tend to have treaty status and a legally bindingness. When people ask me this question, I usually say, it's inconceivable to me that anyone can say, in a context where children are involved, having signed on to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, you just choose to opt out of it. You are bound by it. Now, what is the mechanism that brings that convention to play here? It is the existing mechanisms that we have for accountability purposes and pushing states and all players to be able to do the right thing. But when you couple that with international humanitarian law, the responsibility even goes towards individuals. Does it require a specific program to operationalize this? It requires all of us acting together, but all of those that are in positions of holding others to account, using the report to say, we need action. Civil society, you're not moving fast enough on equity and justice and value addition and all of that. And human rights special procedures saying to states, tell us what you're doing to allow, fair trade where the right to development is concerned, and a whole host of things. But the 4 actions that are identified are intended to catalyze that that inculcation of the principles of the report in the way of doing things. So we start off with the activate the value addition towards equity high-level expert advisory group. This is to catalyze action, but it does so in a context where you already have agencies that are charged with responsibility for development, industrial policy, and all of that. But they've never understood it to mean also the inclusion of the mining of critical minerals. So how do we cauterize the bleeding in the continent? I think my coaches spoke at length about creating mechanisms for accountability on the origins of the minerals that are being bought, looking at agreements that are being struck to ensure acquisition of these minerals, looking at the flow of minerals, asking questions. How is it that you get a country that is not richly endowed, but exports far more than richly endowed countries in the continent? Should anyone be entering into any agreements with those people? So we provide you with also language that we hope will become familiar for you to hold decision makers and actors accountable, but also make sure that the principles set as it were. I don't know if I've answered your question directly on trade. Again, it's an area that is of importance to the continent. How is trade flowing?
Maybe just a follow-up for the DG to weigh in. It's almost in a sense like when you talk about AI, we often hear the horse is already bolted. In many ways, the big powers have been in a search to dominate the acquisition of mines, of these minerals, because they understand where the future is. So is this a report in many ways for these big powers to rein it in? And will this report be able to create the guardrails required to do that?
Thank you for the question. First of all, I think the panel process in itself gives reason for hope and optimism, in the sense that at a time of geopolitical challenges, geostrategic challenges, and at a time on issues where there are many different considerations, different interests, first of all, the UN Secretary General established the panels and asked that we look at these complex issues, but also the panel came together, including from larger players, smaller players, countries, nations with different interests, and organizations, industry, civil society with different interests. And everyone engaged in this towards a common objective, to try to put together the most meaningful recommendations for what can be done, how can we have an impact, how can we help bring change. And so I think that is a strong signal of readiness for change and readiness for engagement also at the global level, taking the starting point in this, and hopefully now over the coming months help bring in more by communicating, by discussing, by continuing the dialogue that has now been started by the UN Secretary General. So I think that in itself and the outcome of the report should give reason for hope and encouragement, and a platform that we can work from to help bring the change that is needed.
Okay, I don't see any questions online. Are there any other questions? Then we thank you very much, and thank you for all the work you've done over the past months, and look forward to reading the report.
Thank you very much.